On a recent episode of the Joe Rogan podcast, author and UFO expert George Knapp talked about a chapter in a textbook in the 1960s that was used by the Air Force to instruct its pilots about UFOs.
I'll give you a cool story. You'll like this. Okay. I talked before about the paper trail, how there is a document, a trail of documents that you can look at. There was a chapter in a textbook being used at the U.S. Air Force Academy. And until UFO people found out about it, this is what they were teaching our best and brightest pilots at the Air Force Academy. And that chapter said, in the course of your career as an aviator, you're likely going to encounter one of these things. Here's what we know about them. We know that there are 4 different alien races visiting this planet, and they've been here for thousands of years. Now, that is blockbuster stuff to be teaching future Joint Chiefs of Staff members and commanders of air bases.
When was this published?
This is in the 1960s. So, but when word of that chapter got out, UFO people found out about it. They pulled it. They yanked it out.
Well, not only did I find the chapter of the textbook in question, but I found a newspaper article confirming the existence of that chapter from back in 1970 when it was still being taught at the academy. So in 1970, the Lemoore Advance, the local newspaper in Lemoore, California, ran this article, and it's not a front page story, but you have to dig down a little bit. Air Academy textbook urges more study of UFO sightings. And in it, they interview this major in the Public Information Office, and he not only confirms the existence of this chapter, but actually says some things that are kind of surprising coming from active military personnel when asked about UFOs. Major Kilpatrick, as second-ranking officer in public affairs at the Air Academy, is in a position to speak authoritatively for the Air Force. He admitted at once that plebes are taught from a text entitled Introductory Space Science Volume 2, and an entire chapter 33 deals entirely with UFO considerations. This leads us with the unpleasant possibility of alien visitors to our planet, the 14-page chapter continues, or at least alien-controlled UFOs. So keep in mind, this is 1970. They're already talking in 1970 about aliens, extraterrestrials, remote piloting aircraft in their airspace. In releasing this interview in the Lemoore Advance, we are well aware that many readers will certainly raise an eyebrow or two, but Major Kilpatrick insisted the above chapter in the text is not a fairy story. At the end, he seemed to go along with the recommendations of the physics textbook, which advises Air Force officers as follows. The best thing to do is to keep an open and skeptical mind and not take an extreme position on any side of the question. Now, while that newspaper article is pretty wild to read, that's not even the only piece of evidence that we have confirming that this chapter in this textbook actually existed. We actually have a formal response from a colonel in the Air Force at the time, in response to a formal letter requesting that this chapter of this textbook be provided. In reference to your recent inquiry to the Air Force Academy concerning UFOs, the following facts are provided for information. The subject of UFOs is examined briefly at the end of an Academy elective course, Physics 370, which usually attracts approximately 20 students per semester. The UFO subject falls under the course objective of discussing all observable or reported physical phenomena occurring from the surface of the sun to the surface of the planets. Now, they're already trying to start off here by clarifying that this isn't broadly taught at the Air Force. It's taught at this one Air Force Academy in a physics course to a very small number of students. When the UFO subject was first included in the course, the subject served from an academic point of view to illustrate that when contradictory data are available, the best course is to keep an open mind and search for further data. The subject remains an excellent vehicle to discuss the implications and applications of many basic physical laws to observed phenomena. Now, before I get into the textbook here in a second, I just want to clarify on this point, that's not all that was discussed in this chapter of this textbook. It actually got way more in detail about aliens than just what this guy is saying. But here's the crafty part. The source of recent news media stories concerning the study of UFOs at the Air Force Academy was an out-of-date chapter in the course text entitled Introductory Space Science. When this chapter was written and printed in 1968, the Air Force was still collecting reports of UFO sightings under Project Blue Book and sponsoring the investigation of UFOs by Dr. Condon of the University of Colorado. The Condon report was completed in early 1969 with the general conclusion that nothing has come from the study of UFOs in the past 2 decades that has added to scientific knowledge, and that further extensive study of UFOs probably cannot be justified in the expectation that science will be advanced. Now, here's the interesting part about this. Project Blue Book did actually wrap up in 1969, officially, as this letter indicates. However, we do now know that crash retrieval programs existed for several decades after this Project Blue Book closed. And we're only just now beginning to learn some of the details of these programs in the congressional hearings that just happened recently. But I think it's fairly safe to say that we may never know the full extent of these government programs. So the study of UFOs, UAPs, extraterrestrials, crash retrieval programs, these programs did not stop after Project Blue Book, as this colonel indicates. But with that out of the way, now we're ready to dive into some of the chapter itself. But before we do that, if you're liking this video so far, now would be a great time to hit that subscribe button. Now, I'm not going to get into reading this entire chapter because it is kind of lengthy. And to be fair, there are some sections in this chapter, they were written in 1970. Where we sit now in 2023, some of these things are a little bit outdated, but I will leave a link in the description if you want to read the whole thing for yourself. However, there are definitely some excerpts from this chapter I wanted to share with you guys. And this chapter gets way more into some sort of esoteric things about UFOs you wouldn't expect to see in a physics textbook at the Air Force. The Book of Zion, I'm sure I'm not pronouncing that right. Evidence of perhaps an even earlier possible contact was uncovered by Shi Pin Lao at the University of Peking at Lake Tungting. 47,000 years old, they show people with large trunks, breathing apparatus, elephant heads shown on human bodies. Remember, the Egyptians often represented their gods as animal heads on human bodies. Only 8,000 years ago, rocks were sculpted in the Tassili Plateau of Sahara, depicting what appeared to be human beings but with strange round heads. And even more recently in the Bible, Genesis tells of angels from the sky mating with women of earth who bore them children. Again, getting into some topics here you would not expect to see in a textbook at the Air Force. But again, as I mentioned, some of the instances they're referring to here have kind of since maybe been debunked, although not completely. In a sworn statement dated April 1897, a prosperous and prominent farmer named Alexander Hamilton told of an attack upon his cattle at about 10:30. And although it's not been completely proven, there was someone that came forward who claimed to know Alexander Hamilton belonged to this liars club, and that story may have been made up. I don't know the veracity of that, and we'll probably never know, but at least the story of cattle mutilations has been around for a very long time. And there's definitely some stuff in this chapter that you would think relates to the Air Force, and they might elaborate on a little bit, but this is all they say about secret weapons. A few individuals have proposed that UFOs are actually advanced weapon systems, and that their natures must not be revealed. Very few people accept this as a credible suggestion. 2 sentences about UFOs being secret weapons. But here's where it gets a little bit wild in what George Knapp was referring to in that intro: alien visitors. The most stimulating theory for us is that the UFOs are material objects which are either manned or remote controlled by beings who are alien to this planet. There is some evidence supporting this viewpoint. In addition to Police Sergeant Lonnie Zamore's experience, let us consider the case of Barney and Betty Hill. Now, the Barney and Betty Hill case is pretty well known, so I won't elaborate on it here, but here's where it gets interesting. The Hill's description of the aliens was similar to descriptions provided in other cases, but this particular type of alien appears to be in the minority. The most commonly described alien is about 3½ feet tall, has a round head, arms reaching to or below his knees, and is wearing a silvery spacesuit or coveralls. Other aliens appear to be essentially the same as Earthmen, while still others have particularly wide wraparound eyes and mouths with very thin lips. And there is a rare group reported as about 4 feet tall, weight of around 35 pounds, and covered with thick hair or fur. Members of this last group are described as being extremely strong. If such beings are visiting Earth, 2 questions arise. Why haven't there been any accidents which have revealed their presence? And 2, why haven't they attempted to contact us officially? Keep in mind, I'm not sure about the original author of this chapter, but this was edited by a major and a lieutenant colonel in the Air Force. So several people at the Air Force approved this chapter for release to be taught in an Air Force Academy physics class. That is wild. And here's a section on human fear and hostility. Besides the foregoing reasons, contacting humans is downright dangerous. We too have fired on UFOs. About 10 o'clock one morning, a radar site picked up a UFO doing 700 miles per hour. The UFO then slowed to 100 miles per hour, and 2 F-86s were scrambled to intercept. Eventually, one F-86 closed on the UFO at about 3,000 feet in altitude. The UFO began to accelerate away, but the pilot still managed to get within 500 yards of the target for a short period of time. It was definitely saucer-shaped. As the pilot pushed the F-86 at top speed, the UFO began to pull away. When the range reached 1,000 yards, the pilot armed his guns and fired in an attempt to down the saucer. He failed, and the UFO pulled away rapidly, vanishing in the distance. Once again, this is in an Air Force edited and approved chapter in a physics textbook, openly admitting that they have fired on UFOs. The hypothesis is tested by repeating the entire process, with each cycle resulting in an increase in understanding, we hope. The UFO phenomenon does not yield readily to this approach because the data taken so far exhibits both excessive variety and vagueness. The vagueness is caused in part by the lack of preparation of the observer. Very few people leave their house knowing that they're going to see a UFO that evening. Photographs are overexposed or underexposed and rarely in color. Hardly anyone carries around a radiation counter or magnetometer. And in addition to this, there's a very high level of noise in the data. The noise consists of mistaken reports of known natural phenomena, hoaxes, reports by unstable individuals, and mistaken removal of data regarding possible unnatural or unknown natural phenomena by overzealous individuals who are trying to eliminate all data due to known natural phenomena. So essentially, he's describing why it's so hard to actually get real photos, real evidence of UFOs. And that's a criticism that remains today. Why don't we have photos if so many people are seeing these things? And to me, that's a really simple argument to counter. iPhone cameras, which pretty much everyone has today, are really good at taking selfies and up-close photos. But if you've ever tried to take a picture of something far away and zoom it out to 915x, it's almost impossible to get a clear picture. How would you be able to take a picture of something 1,000 feet in the air with an iPhone camera? You should try it sometime. And lastly, we get to the conclusion section. From available information, the UFO phenomenon appears to have been global in nature for almost 50,000 years. The majority of known witnesses have been reliable people who have seen easily explained natural phenomena, and there appears to be no overall positive correlation with population density. The entire phenomenon could be psychological in nature, but that is quite doubtful. However, psychological factors probably do enter the data picture as noise. Basically, what they're saying is there's a lot of reliable people who saw something that is easily explained by natural phenomena rather than immediately jumping to UFOs, and I tend to agree. The phenomenon could also be entirely due to known and unknown phenomena, but that too is questionable in view of some of the available data. This leaves us with the unpleasant possibility of alien visitors to our planet, or at least of alien-controlled UFOs. However, the data are not well correlated, and what questionable data there are suggests the existence of at least 3 and maybe 4 different groups of aliens, possibly at different stages of development. This too is difficult to accept. It implies the existence of intelligent life on a majority of the planets in our solar system, or a surprisingly strong interest in Earth by members of other solar systems. A solution to the UFO problem may be obtained by the long and diligent effort of a large group of well-financed and competent scientists. Unfortunately, there is no evidence suggesting that such an effort is going to be made. And even 50 years later, we still aren't there. However, even if such an effort were made, there is no guarantee of success because of the isolated and sporadic nature of the sightings. Also, there may be nothing to find, and that would mean a long search with no proof at the end. The best thing to do is to keep an open and skeptical mind and not take an extreme position on any side of the question. Very much agree with that final statement. However, I do have to point out that we now sit 50 years later on a large pile of documented encounters with these UFOs by US Air Force and Navy pilots. So while the idea that we didn't have a lot of documented evidence of UFOs may have been true in 1970, I'm not so sure that idea holds up anymore. And now you might find it interesting that, as George Knapp said, once the UFO community and the media got a hold of it, the Air Force very quickly changed the chapter of this textbook. And in this formal request for the chapter, they also submitted the updated version of the chapter. And as you might have guessed, it takes all discussion of aliens and UFOs out and basically just says, yeah, we don't really have any evidence or confirmation that any of these things exist. Project Blue Book continued to receive and evaluate UFO reports, but the conclusions reached were not always accepted by ufologists and the general public. The Air Force was often accused of trying to cover up the UFO problem and of withholding information, allegedly indicating the UFOs are extraterrestrial. And in fact, pretty much everything after that statement is trying to disprove the existence of extraterrestrials or aliens. Despite the fact that in that previous chapter, they confirmed that the Air Force had in fact already fired on UFOs. Pretty much a 180 turn there. As a result of investigating UFO reports since 1948, the conclusions of Project Blue Book are: 1. No UFO reported, investigated, and evaluated by the Air Force has ever given any indication of threat to our national security. 2. There has been no evidence submitted or discovered by the Air Force that sightings categorized as unidentified represent technological developments or principles beyond the range of present-day scientific knowledge. And 3, there has been no evidence indicating that sightings categorized as unidentified are extraterrestrial vehicles. Pretty much took the entire chapter, rewrote it to say there's no aliens, there's no evidence of aliens, and the Air Force knows nothing about aliens. But at this point, I would love to know what you guys think in the comments below. Do you think somebody at the Air Force and the intelligence community got wind of this and decided to change the entire textbook? Or do you think someone just wrote this textbook when nobody was paying attention, and then once the media got a hold of it, then they decided to change it so people would just stop bugging the Air Force about questions about UFOs? Let me know in the comments below, and once again, if you have not hit the subscribe button yet, please do so. It really helps me to build the channel and keep bringing quality videos to you guys, and I will catch you guys on the next one.